The Boy That Wrote Poetry, de Yukio Mishima. Poem after poem flowed from his pen with astonishing ease. It took him little time to fill the 30 pages of one of the notebooks from the peer school. How was it possible, the boy wondered, that he could write 2 or 3 poems a day? One week, when he was sick in bed, he composed, "A week, anthology, a cut an oval," in the cover of his notebook to highlight the word poems on the first page. Below, he wrote in English, 18 May 1940. His poems began to attract the attention of the senior student. The fuss is about my quince years, but the boy trusted in his genius. He began to be bold when talking to the older students. He wanted to stop saying, "It's possible." He had to always say, "Yes." He was anemic from too much masturbation. But his own ugliness had not yet begun to bother him. Poetry was something apart from those physical sensations of disgust. Poetry was something apart from everything. In the subtle lies of a poem, he learned the art of lying subtly. The only thing that mattered was that the words were beautiful. All day long he studied the dictionary. When he was in ecstasy, a world of metaphors materialized before his eyes. The caterpillar made lace with the cherry leaves. A pebble thrown through splendid oaks flew toward the sea. Herons pierced the tattered sheet of the stormy sea to search the depths for the drowned. Peaches softly made up, amid the hum of golden insects, the air, like an arc of flames behind a statue, swirled and twisted around a crowd trying to escape. The sunset portended evil. It took on the dark tincture of iodine. The winter trees raised their wooden paws to the sky, and a girl sat by an oven, her body like a burning rose. I approached the window and discovered it was an artificial flower. Her skin, like goosebumps from the cold, turned into the worn petal of a velvet flower. When the world transformed in this way, he was happy. It did not surprise him that the birth of a poem brought him this kind of happiness. He knew mentally that a poem is born from sadness, curse, or despair from the womb of solitude. But for this to be his case, he needed a deeper interest in himself, some problem that overwhelmed him. Although he was convinced of his genius, he had curiously very little interest in himself. The outside world seemed more fascinating to him. It would be more accurate to say that in moments when, for no apparent reason, he was happy, the world meekly assumed the forms he desired. Poetry came to safeguard his moments of happiness, or was it the birth of his poems that made it possible? He wasn't sure. He only knew it was a different happiness from the one he felt when his parents brought him something he had longed for, or when they took him on a trip, and it was a happiness solely his own. The boy did not like to scrutinize the outside world, or his inner being constantly and attentively. If the object that caught his attention did not suddenly become an image, if on a May noon the whitish glow of the newborn leaves did not turn into the dark gleam of the cherry buds at night, he instantly became bored and stopped looking at it. A coldly rejected real but strange objects he could not transform. There is no poetry in that. One morning, when he had anticipated the questions of an exam, he answered quickly, put the answers on the teacher's desk without even looking at them, and left before all his classmates. As he crossed the deserted courtyards towards the gate, the shine of the golden sphere on the flagpole caught his eye. An ineffable sense of happiness seized him. The flag was not raised. It was not a holiday. But he felt it was a holiday for his spirit, and that the flagpole sphere celebrated it. His mind turned quickly towards poetry, towards the ecstasy of the moment, the fullness of that solitude its extraordinary lightness, every corner of his body intoxicated with lucidity, the harmony between the outside world and his inner being. When he did not naturally fall into that state, he tried to use anything at hand to induce the same intoxication. He scrutinized his room through a cigarette box made of veined tortoiseshell. He shook his mother's cosmetics bottle and watched the tumultuous dance of the powder as it left the clear surface of the liquid and settled gently at the bottom. Without the slightest emotion, he used words like supplication, curse, and disdain. The boy was in the literary club. One of the committee members had lent him a key that allowed him to enter the club alone, and at any time to immerse himself in his favorite dictionaries. He liked the pages about the romantic poets in the Dictionary of World Literature. In their portraits, they did not have tangled old man beards. They were all young and beautiful. He was interested in the brevity of the poets' lives. Poets should die young. But even a premature death was something distant for a 15-year-old. From this arithmetic certainty, the boy could contemplate premature death without worry. He liked Wilde's sonnet, the grave of Keats, stripped of life when love and life were new, here lies the youngest of the martyrs. There was something surprising in those real disasters. That benevolently befell poets. He believed in a predetermined harmony. The predetermined harmony in a poet's biography. Believing in this was like believing in his own genius. He took pleasure in imagining long elegies in his honor, posthumous fame. But imagining his own corpse made him feel clumsy. He thought feverishly, "May I live like a rocket. May I paint the night sky with my entire being for a moment and extinguish instantly." He considered all kinds of lives, and no other seemed tolerable. Suicide repulsed him. The predetermined harmony would find a more satisfying way to kill him. Poetry began to dull his spirit. If he had been more diligent, he would have thought more passionately about suicide. At the morning assembly, the student monitor called his name. This implied a harsher punishment than being summoned to the teacher's office. "You know what it's about," his friend said to intimidate him. He turned pale, and his hands trembled. The monitor, waiting for the boy, was writing something with a steel pen in the dead ashes of the hibachi. When the boy entered, the monitor said, "Sit down, courteously." There was no reprimand. He said he had read his poems in the alumni magazine. Then he asked many questions about poetry and his home life. Finally, he said, "There are two types, Schiller and Goethe." "You know who Schiller is, don't you?" "You mean Schiller?" "Yes." Never try to become a Schiller. Be a gay. The boy left the monitor's room and dragged himself to the classroom, dissatisfied and frowning. He had not read Goethe or Schiller, but he knew their portraits. He didn't like Goethe. He is an old man. Schiller is young. Like him better. The president of the literary club, a young man named Eri, who was 5 years older, began to protect him. He also liked Eri because it was clear he considered himself an anonymous genius, and because he recognized the boy's genius without considering their age difference at all. Geniuses had to be friends. Eri was the son of a peer. He fancied himself a Villiers de l'Isle Adam, felt proud of his family's noble lineage, and infused his work with a decadent nostalgia for the aristocratic tradition of letters. Eri had also published a private edition of his poems and essays. The boy felt envious. They exchanged long letters every day. They liked this routine. Almost every morning, a letter from Eri, arrived at the boy's house in a peach-colored Western style, enveloped. No matter how long the letters were, they never exceeded a certain weight. What the boy loved was that voluminous lightness, that feeling that they were full but floated. At the end of the letter he copied a recent poem, written that very day, or if he hadn't had time, an earlier poem. The content of the letters was trivial. They began with a critique of the poem the other had sent in the last letter, followed by endless chatter, where each talked about the music they had listened to, the daily episodes of their families, the impressions of the girls they found beautiful, the books they had read, the poetic experiences where a word revealed worlds, and so on. Neither the 20-year-old young man nor the 15-year-old boy tired of this habit. But the boy recognized in E.R.'s letters a pale melancholy. The shadow of a slight discomfort he knew was never present in his own. A suspicion of reality, an anxiety about something he would soon have to face, gave E.R.'s letters a certain spirit of loneliness and pain. The calm boy perceived this spirit as an unimportant shadow that would never fall upon him. Will I ever see ugliness? The boy pondered such problems. He did not expect them. Old age, for example, which had worn Goethe down after enduring it for many years. It had never occurred to him to think of something like old age. Even the bloom of youth, beautiful to some and ugly to others, was still far away. He forgot the ugliness he discovered in himself. The boy was captivated by the illusion that confuses art with the artist, the illusion projected onto the artist by naive and spoiled girls. He was not interested in the analysis and study of that being who was himself, in whom he always dreamed. He belonged to the world of metaphor, to the endless kaleidoscope where a girl's nakedness turned into an artificial flower. One who creates beautiful things cannot be ugly. It was a thought stubbornly rooted in his mind, but he never inexplicably asked himself the most important question. Was it necessary for someone beautiful to create beautiful things? Necessary? The boy would have laughed at the word. His poems did not arise from necessity. They came to him naturally. Even if he tried to deny them, the poems themselves moved his hand and forced him to write. Necessity implied a lack, something he could not conceive in himself. Herrera said, first of all, the sources of his poetry to the word genius, and he could not believe there was a lack in him that he was not aware of. And even if he were, he preferred to call it genius and not lack. Not that he was incapable of criticizing his own poems. There was, for example, a 4-line poem that the older students praised extravagantly. He found it frivolous and pitied it. It was a poem that said, "Just as the transparent edge of this glass has a blue glow, so your clear eyes can hide a spark of love." The boy loved the praise of others, but his arrogance did not allow him to drown in it. The truth was that not even Ear's talent impressed him much. Of course, Eyre had enough talent to stand out among the advanced students of the literary club, but that meant nothing. There was a frigid corner in the boy's heart. If Eyre had not exhausted his verbal treasure to praise the boy's talent, perhaps the boy would not have made any effort to acknowledge ours. He was perfectly aware that the occasional reward for his taste for that calm pleasure was the absence of any abrupt adolescent excitement. Twice a year, the schools held baseball series called the League Games. When the Piers School lost, the penultimate year students who had cheered on the players during the game surrounded them and shared their sobs. He never cried, nor did he feel sad. Why feel sad? Because we lost a baseball game. Those tearful faces, so strange, surprised him. The boy knew he felt things easily, but his sensitivity was directed differently from everyone else's. The things that made them cry had no echo in his heart. The boy began to make love the theme of his poetry more and more. He had never been in love, but he was bored with basing his poetry only on the transformations of nature, and he set out to sing the metamorphoses that occurred moment by moment in the soul. He did not regret singing what he had not lived. Something in him had always believed that art was exactly that. He did not lament his lack of experience. There was no opposition or tension between the world he had yet to live in and the world he had within himself. He did not have to go far to believe in the superiority of his inner world. An irrational kind of confidence allowed him to believe that there was no emotion in the world left for him to feel. Because the boy thought that a spirit as keen and sensitive as his had already apprehended the archetypes of all emotions, albeit sometimes as pure premonitions, that all experience could be reconstructed with the proper combinations of these elements of emotion. But what were these elements? He had his own arbitrary definition: words. Not that the boy had achieved a mastery of words that was genuinely his own. But he thought that the universality of many of the words he found in the dictionary made them varied in their meaning, and with different content, and therefore available for his personal use. For a unique and individual use. It did not occur to him that only experience could give words color and creative fullness. The first encounter between our inner world and language confronts something entirely individual with something universal. It is also the occasion for an individual, refined by the universal, to finally recognize themselves. The 15-year-old was more than familiar with this indescribable inner experience. For the disharmony he felt upon encountering a new word also made him feel an unknown emotion. It helped him maintain an outward calm incompatible with his youth. When a certain emotion seized him, the disharmony it awakened led him to remember the elements of the disharmony he had felt before the word. He then remembered the word and used it to name the emotion before him. The boy became practical in thus disposing of emotion. This is how he came to know all things: humiliation, agony, despair, execration, the joy of love, the sorrow of lovelessness. It would have been easy for him to resort to imagination. But the boy hesitated to do so. Imagination requires a kind of identification where the self suffers with the pain of others. The boy in his coldness never felt the pain of others. Without feeling the slightest pain, he whispered to himself, "That is pain. It is something I know." It was a sunny May afternoon. Classes were over. The boy was walking to the literary club to see if there was anyone there he could talk to on his way home. He met Ere, who said, "I was hoping we'd meet. Let's talk." They entered the barrack-style building where the classrooms had been partitioned to house the different clubs. The literary club was in a corner of the dark first floor. They could hear noises, laughter, and the school anthem in the sports club, and the echo of a piano in the music club. Ere put the key in the lock of the dirty wooden door. It was a door that had to be pushed open even without a key. The room was empty, with the usual smell of dust. Ere entered it and opened the window, clapped his hands to dust them off, and sat in a dilapidated seat. Once settled, the boy began to talk. "Last night I had a dream in color." The boy imagined that dreams in color were the prerogative of poets. There was a hill of red earth. The earth was a burning red, and the sunset, red and bright, made its color more resplendent. From the right came a man dragging a long chain. A peacock 4 or 5 times bigger than the man was teed to its end and dragged its feathers slowly in front of me. The peacock was a bright green. Its whole body was green and shone beautifully. I kept watching the peacock as it was dragged away until I could see it no more. It was a fantastic dream. My dreams are very vivid when they're in color, almost too vivid. What would a green peacock mean to Freud? What would it mean? Ehre didn't seem very interested. He was different than usual. He was just as pale, but his voice lacked its usual calm and feverish tone, nor did he respond with passion. He had apparently listened to the boy's monologue with indifference. No, he wasn't listening. The affected high collar of our Erie's uniform was sprinkled with dandruff. The dim light made the cherry blossom of his gold emblem gleamer, and it elongated his nose, which was already quite large. It was elegantly shaped, but a tad too large, and it showed an unmistakable expression of anxiety. Ayres' anguish seemed to manifest itself in his nose. On the desk were old galleys covered in dust, rulers, red pencils, lacquer, bound volumes of the alumni magazine, and manuscripts someone had started. The boy loved this literary confusion. Ehre rummaged through the galleys as if reluctantly tidying up, and his thin white fingers got dirty with dust. The boy made a mocking gesture. But Ehre clicked his tongue in annoyance, dusted off his hands, and said, "The truth is, I wanted to talk to you about something today." "About what?" "The truth is," Ehre hesitated at first, but then spat out the words, "I'm suffering. Something terrible has happened to me." "Are you in love?" the boy asked coldly. "Yes." Ehre explained the circumstances. He had fallen in love with another man's young wife, had been discovered by his father, and was forbidden to see her again. The boy stared at Ehre with wide eyes. "Here is someone in love. For the first time, I can see love with my eyes. It was not a beautiful sight. It was rather unpleasant." Her as-usual vitality had disappeared. He was downcast. He simmensullen. The boy had often observed this expression on the faces of people who had lost something or missed their train. But having an older student confide in him was a flattery to his vanity. He did not feel sad. He made a valiant effort to assume a melancholy expression. But the banal air of a person in love was hard to bear. Finally, he found some consoling words. "It's terrible, but I'm sure a good poem will come out of it." Ehre responded weakly. "This is not a time for poetry. But isn't poetry a salvation in times like this? The happiness that creating a poem brought?" Flashed through the boy's mind. He thought that any pain or agony could be erased by the power of that happiness. Things don't work that way. You don't understand yet. This phrase wounded the boy's pride. His heart froze, and he planned revenge. Oh, if you were a true poet, a genius, wouldn't poetry save you in a moment like this? "Gold Roadworther," replied, saved himself from suicide. But he could only write it because, deep down in his soul, he knew that nothing, not even poetry, could save him, and that the only thing left was suicide. Then, why didn't Goethe commit suicide? If writing and suicide are the same thing, why didn't he commit suicide? Because he was a coward? Or because he was a genius? Because he was a genius. 10. The boy was going to insist on another question, but he didn't understand it himself. He vaguely came to the idea that what had saved Goethe was selfishness. The idea of using this notion to defend himself took hold of him. R.S. phrase, "You don't understand yet," had wounded him deeply. Ace, his age, there was nothing stronger than the feeling of inferiority due to age. Although he did not dare to utter it, a proposition mocking had arisen in his mind. He is not a genius. He falls in love. R.S. love was undoubtedly real. It was the kind of love a genius should never have. Ere, to embellish his misery, resorted to the love of Fujitsubo and Genji, of Peleus and Melisande, of Tristan and Isolde, of the Princess of Cleves and the Duke of Nemours as examples of illicit love. As he listened, the boy was scandalized that there was not a single element in R.E.'s confession that he did not know. Everything had been written, everything had been foreseen, everything had been rehearsed. The love written in books was more vital than this. The love sung in poems was more beautiful. A could not understand why R resorted to reality to have sublime dreams. A could not understand this desire for the mediocre. Ere seemed to have calmed down with his words, and now began a long recounting of the girl's attributes. She must have been extraordinarily beautiful, but the boy could not imagine her. "Next time, I'll show you her picture," Ere said. Not without shame, he finished dramatically. "She told me that my forehead was really beautiful." The boy looked at R.E.'s forehead, under the hair combed back. It was bulging, and the skin shone faintly under the dim light coming through the door. It gave the impression of having two protrusions, each as large as a fist. "It's a brow ridge," thought the boy. He didn't find it beautiful at all. "My forehead is also bulging," he thought. Having a brow ridge and being handsome are not the same thing. At that moment the boy had a revelation of something. He had seen the ridiculous impurity that always intrudes on our consciousness of love or life, that ridiculous impurity without which we cannot survive in either. That is, the conviction that having a brow ridge makes us beautiful. The boy thought that he too, perhaps in a more intellectual way, was making his way in life thanks to a similar conviction. Something in that thought made him shudder. "What are you thinking?" Ere asked, softly, as usual. The boy bit his lips and smiled. The day was darkening. He heard the shouts from where the baseball club was practicing. He perceived the lucidature when a ball hit by a bat was sent skyward. "Some day, perhaps, I will also stop writing poetry," the boy thought for the first time in his life. But he still had to discover that he had never been a poet.